Welcome to the Pitbull Patti Show. This season, we're inviting you to take the Lit Grit Challenge by reading great literature just 1 hour a day, 52 books in 52 weeks to give you the grit you need to succeed. Welcome to the Pitbull Patti Show. I'm Patti Stueckler, along with my son Conor, and we are in week 2 of the Lit Grit Challenge. Hopefully you're taking us up on the challenge and reading 1 hour a day, and then doing that you should be able to read 1 book a week, and hopefully following along with some of the books that we're covering, right, Conor?
Yeah, and I've been told that Lit Grit is pretty legit.
Yeah,
by one of my friends that I guess listened to the podcast. So that was good.
The Lit Grit is legit. That's right. So we got such a great book. This Power of Habits: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg is just an awesome book. I love this book. In fact, you actually
I put you onto it. Yeah. I was the plug.
Yeah.
No, it's a great book. I really love Charles Duhigg. He's actually got another one of his books right here that we're gonna tackle a little bit later. Smarter, Faster, Better. But they're both excellent books. I think he's a New York Times bestseller. Both of these books are. He does a great job really researching the project that he's working on. He's got a ton of studies in this that kind of explain the why for some of the more technical aspects of the book.
Charles Duhigg, though, is he graduated from Yale, and then I think his MBA is from Harvard. So, I mean, he's just a super smart guy, really, like you're saying, really well researched his habits. And he talks about, I think, one of the more interesting stories, and there's lots of them in the book, but he talks about a girl named Lisa Allen. She's like 34 years old, and this is at the very beginning of the book. And her life is just a total hot mess, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
She's just out of control. She's like way overweight, heavy smoker. Her relationship is in shambles. Her husband is cheating on her, and she's like stalking.
Got maxed out credit cards. Well, not quite maxed out.
Yeah, almost maxed out. Stalking the girlfriend, like banging on her door. I mean, like just really, she's just a hot mess. And and she decides, okay, I've got a little bit left on my credit cards. I want to go see the pyramids, which I personally think is a weird thing to. I don't know why. Don't you? If I only had a little bit of money left on my credit cards and I was going to do something really rogue, that's not what I would do. I don't know what I'd do. I'd go to the beach or something, or I don't know. I'd go to
maybe
Bahamas.
You wouldn't have the transformation that she had.
I don't know. But she decides to go to Cairo. She wants to go see the pyramids. So she goes, and she's, jet lagged. It's late at night, and she reaches for a cigarette and starts smelling the smell of burning plastic and realizes that she has lit a pen instead of a cigarette, and she just falls apart. She just starts crying, sobbing, like, wow, my life is just a mess. And it was in that trip that she makes this decision, I'm going to come back a year from now, and I'm going to go on this trek of the desert. And in doing that, she decides, well, I'm not going to be able to make this trek if I don't quit smoking. I can't, I don't. So in the next 6 months from that point, she quits smoking and replaces smoking with running. Right.
Yep. And I think that's a key point to make, is that in habit recreation or replacing a bad habit with a better habit, you really do need something to take its place. So what happened with Lisa Allen is she quit smoking and replaced that bad habit with jogging, and it really started a domino effect that totally transformed her life.
Yeah, and so she was part of actually a study that he talks about. And within 4 years of just totally hitting such a terrible rock bottom point in her life, she had, paid off all of her debt. She had quit smoking. She'd run a marathon, bought a house.
Lost 60 pounds.
Went to grad school. Mm-hmm. I mean, she just totally transformed who she was.
Or total 180, rather.
Yeah, 360 would probably be.
Put you right back where you started. But no, it was really great because what the book talks about too is that the importance of that keystone habit, and it really being the catalyst for this dramatic transformation that she went through. And so by quitting smoking and replacing it with jogging, that led her to start getting in better shape. Well, then that started to bring about changes in her diet, because now she's exercising, now she's not smoking, so she's starting to eat better. Once she started to eat better, then she started doing meal prep, started spending her money better, so she started to be able to save money, and it really led into a total transformation with that one first domino that set off this drastic change for her. So I think
yeah,
that was
just
really
kind of like a snowball that just keeps going down.
She gained
down
once you start to gain that momentum, then you can really have some totally transform your life.
Yeah, I thought that was such a great story because it really highlights how far down somebody can be, and then just absolutely change their life by starting to change their habits. And like you were talking about with the keystone habit, I personally think that smoking is probably a keystone habit for a lot of people.
Sure.
Wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
Probably drinking too would be probably right up there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a smoker. Never have smoked, but just seems like that's something that I can imagine.
To me too, I also think it's great because it shows that the power that taking that one initial change can have. Because a lot of times when you're down in the dumps, you almost feel like, well, what's the point of quitting smoking? Well, this kind of shows you the path that, hey, start with that first change and it can have instrumental impact on the rest of your life. So I think gives you a little bit of confidence and can be a little inspiring too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Give you hope that if you really want to change your life,
that you're one habit away. You're one habit away that'll then totally transform your life.
Well, so maybe. I mean, I guess.
No, I mean if you have the right one,
habit,
yeah. Well, I mean you obviously got to stack and build on it, but I think that's an encouraging thing, especially if you're at rock bottom or whatever.
Yeah,
like she was.
Yeah, exactly. And this author Charles Duhigg talks about, he breaks down habits into a 3-part process.
Yeah. From
the cue to the routine, which is actually the habit itself, and then the reward. So what a person gets out of smoking a cigarette or having a drink or whatever.
Right, and it's what's great about this book is it talks about really the kind of why that all of like the cue, routine, reward, why the aspects of it, and it talks about the the neurology and the brain scans, and that to me is really fascinating because you can tell me to do something, but unless you show me why it works or tell me, I have a good, healthy degree of skepticism or. I've been told.
Just a little.
Just a little. So I don't like to take things at face value. I like to show me the proof of it. And that's one thing that Charles Duhigg does a great job of doing. He gives you all this information, this analytical information, brain scans, and all these Stanford psychology tests and all these studies that
the mice. I thought the mice.
Yeah, no, that's a great example because he basically they put these little brain scanners on
little tiny ones.
Yeah, like for the mouse for these mice, and so they could measure the brain activity they had, and so they would put them through this maze, and it's basically like a T-shaped maze, and there'd be chocolate at one end, and what they found was when the first couple times they would go through the maze, they'd have a click, the door would open, their brain activity would skyrocket. And then as they went through the maze, they'd be scratching the wall, sniffing, trying to figure out where they are. Is there a danger in this area or is there a possible reward like there was with chocolate? So as they go through the maze, their brain activity is basically spiked the whole way through. They find the chocolate at the end, and that's their reward. So their brain activity stays spiked. So literally the first couple of times that these mice went through the maze, their brain activity was spiked essentially the whole way through. And what they found is the more times they went through it, the changes in their brain activity were drastic, which what I thought was really, really fascinating. And it shows you once something becomes a habit, you're basically on autopilot. So what they found was that the gate opening and the click sound playing was the cue, the going through the maze was the routine, and then the chocolate was the reward. So as the first time they went through, brain activity was very high throughout. As it became a routine, they'd have a spike of brain activity when the door opened and the click sounded, and then the brain activity would drop to extremely low levels as they went through the maze because they knew what they were doing. They knew how to get through the maze,
go straight,
and
turn
hang
left,
a left, exactly.
Get the chocolate.
and then their brain activity would spike again when they had the reward. So they were able to really, through all this data, break this habit down into cue, routine, reward. So it's not like just something Charles Duhigg came up with, but there's actually all this data behind it and literally brain activity data that corresponds with this. And then what's really fascinating is once they really became familiar with the maze, that they would have another element introduced into the 3-step process, which was a craving. So they would have that door open, and then their brain activity would be spiked, similar to when they got the chocolate, just knowing that the chocolate was coming. So I thought that was really interesting, and that's how these habits really reinforce themselves and become either a good habit or a bad habit for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super fascinating because when you think about it, once a habit is established, then the brain goes into this, like you said, it goes into the spike, gets the craving, and then basically almost gets the reward feeling, and then goes into minimalization kind of mode, or conservation is probably a better word.
Yeah. Yep.
Conservation mode, where the brain activity becomes very conserved. So just like when you're driving a car, or we'll say when you're a brand new driver, and you're just learning, getting your license, and you're backing out of the driveway, or you're driving down the road, you're on high alert, your brain is 100% engaged, and you're trying not to hit mailboxes.
You're looking your side mirror, your rear view, you're looking for mailboxes, you're trying to stay on the driveway, you're trying not to hit pedestrians or run over animals or anything. So your brain activity is spiked the whole way through, because you're paying every little detail, you're giving a lot of attention to. But once you become a driver, and you've been doing it for a year or 6 months or 6 years, you basically just turn the car on, throw the car in reverse, check your mirror, and then back out without really ever thinking about it. And so what's interesting to me too is that he talks about how habits are an evolutionary thing, and it's to preserve your brain energy, and so that you have brain, the capacity to make difficult decisions when they arise, and you can kind of put your brain on autopilot when it's something that doesn't require your full attention.
Which then is most of your life, because he talks about that 60% of your day for most people is 100% habits.
Right.
Just, how you talk to your kids, what you eat, what time you go to sleep, what you wear. All those things are all habits. They're just a sequence of habits. So it's really fascinating to understand how to break it down, because like what you were talking about with driving, when you're driving your car and it's a habit, and you don't even think about driving being a habit, do you?
Right.
But it actually is.
Of course.
And so when you're driving, you're thinking about, your relationship or your work or 8 other things. You're not thinking about actually driving. And sometimes don't you even get somewhere and think to yourself, wow, like you feel like you almost weren't even paying attention.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like how did I even get here? Because my brain was somewhere else, not thinking about, that I'm on the beltway driving my car. So it's kind of one of those things, if you can break down the habit and really identify and isolate what the reward is that you're craving, and then that's what you need to focus on changing if you want to break a habit. So if say you're a smoker and you're smoking because you're bored at work and you want to go outside in the freezing cold with all the other smokers and smoke your cigarette outside of the building. What are you actually, now in that case, actually nicotine probably.
Right.
I mean, that's.
Well, I think there's 2 ways to kind of look at this book in terms of like your own personal development, because I think that's what the Lick Grit Challenge is all about, is how do you create new healthy habits, and then how do you replace and kind of wean out old habits or bad habits. So I think that's really interesting, but it gives you a blueprint for doing both. Mm-hmm. Like let's say, like for me, I wanted to start working out again. So I had to look at, okay, I want to work out, so now how do I use that 3-step process, cue, routine, reward, to actually start working out again and then make it a habit? Because, I played college football, so I worked out every day for, high school and college for like 8 years. And then once I was done playing football and I graduated, I didn't lift for like five years. So I really had to focus on that and try and create that habit again, because I'd totally gotten out of the habit and was quite frankly mentally weak. I just didn't. I'm like, I'm chilling. What do I want to be sore for?
Lazy.
But so for me it was okay. Well, now I've got kind of this blueprint. Well, how do I apply it to my life? And I think that's an important thing for all these books. You should be reading them in the context of how can you apply what you're reading to your life. I think that's a really, really important thing. Otherwise, why you put yourself through it? Yeah. So for me, I tried to work out in the morning. I'm not really a guy that works out in the morning, so for me, luckily, I do real estate, so I've got a flexible schedule, and I work a lot of evenings and weekends and all that. So for me, I kind of settled on time at 2 o'clock, to where it was like I got some stuff done in the morning, but then I was getting a little bored with being at work. So it was actually the perfect time for me. So the cue was like 2:30 in the afternoon. I'd work out. That'd be my routine. And then the reward was the endorphins that you get from working out. Also, just the satisfaction of knowing, hey, I'm doing what I'm setting out to do. And then also for me especially, and I don't care if it's vain or not, but you get a pump when you work out, so you get to walk around with your shirt off and flex a little bit. And so that was really the reward for me was that, and the endorphins and just knowing that. But then also for me was another way to kind of reinforce it, and then to continue that reward feeling was tracking my workout, so I could actually see, oh man, 2 weeks ago I did this, and now I'm doing a personal best. So it's that additional kind of encouragement from tracking your workouts, and so that becomes a reward too. So that was one way I've been able to apply this book to my life, because I read it probably about 6 months ago, and then had told you about it and said we should definitely put it on the list, and obviously I just read it again this past week, so it's been really good for me.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because the author talks about, gives examples to where then when you're talking about application of the material that in these books, like you said, it does no good to read books if you're not, like these, if you're not going to then try to apply them to your life and hopefully, live smarter, better, more successfully.
Smarter, faster, better.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, he talks about an example of when he used to work for, some company where every day around 3 o'clock, he would go down to the cafeteria, he'd go eat a donut, and he wanted to break that habit. And so obviously the cue for him was about the time of day, the 3 in the afternoon, the habit of going down and eating a donut, and then the reward was obviously a nice sweet sugary donut.
Right.
But then he decided, okay, I want to isolate what is the reward. Am I really wanting something sweet, or am I really bored at about 3 o'clock? I'm getting kind of bored at work, like you were just talking about in the afternoon.
Right.
Hey,
you
it's
reach a point in the afternoon where it's it's like the midday lull. I mean,
it's kind of like
you kind of want to break up your day.
So he would go. So he decided, okay, is it really that, or is it that I want social interaction with
or am I
peers?
craving the sweet, or am I just actually hungry?
Yeah, exactly. So he started to isolate that, and then what he would do was then change the routine to one day he would go down to the cafeteria and eat an apple. Right. The next day he would, instead of going to the cafeteria at all, he would go on a
10-minute walk.
Yeah, and then the third day he would go over to a peer's desk and chat for 10 minutes and then go back to his desk. And then what he suggests is that you come back from changing the routine to something else, writing down 3 thoughts, whatever they are, the random, whether it's your emotional state, what you saw, whatever it is. I saw Sally in a blue dress, I'm feeling tired, whatever the thoughts are. And you write those down. And then you set a timer for 15 minutes. And then in 15 minutes you come back and you say, do I still want to go down and eat a donut?
Right.
And if you say no, well then, so that tells you.
Right. Okay, it's a process of elimination and trying to figure out exactly
isolating.
Yeah.
No question. And then he talks about the cues, that most cues can be broken down into 5 categories.
Yep.
Like the time of day, the location, who you're with. Like my sister Mary, we always drink wine. So it's like you can kind of identify those things, or even your state of mind. Like sometimes when people get really sad and they eat 3 bowls of ice cream. So that kind of thing. So he breaks that down. Or it was the
immediate thought before, right?
Or whatever happened. Something that happened. That was the 5th cue.
Whatever. So, and a cue is kind of like a trigger. I mean, especially when you're thinking about it in this context of a bad habit. You might get into an argument and that triggers you to then, eat a bunch of ice cream, just as an example. But then you can start to, once you realize that that's a habit, then you can start to identify those cues, and that way you can eventually change that habit. So I think it's great because it gives you a blueprint for creating new habits. Like for me, I felt like I wasn't replacing a habit with lifting. I just needed to start that positive habit. But then it also gives you the blueprint to change bad habits. Like if you do smoke or you overeat or whatever.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's about not just breaking a bad habit like smoking, but then starting good habits.
Right.
Like,
and that is one thing
with running.
Yeah, and that's one thing they said from studying her brain scans is that because it creates neural pathways, habits do. And then it's kind of like when I think he talks about folding a piece of paper, it's more likely to go back to that same way. So you're more likely, your brain is a muscle, it creates muscle memory essentially. So in order to really get rid of that poor habit, you need to replace it with something else. You need to have new neural connections and kind of flex that muscle in a different way.
Yeah, and now he doesn't talk about it in this book, but I know I've read somewhere, and I'm sure you have too, that it takes something like 14 days to break a habit, and in some cases 21 or 30 days.
I've
to
read,
break a
depending
habit.
on the book, I've seen as many as like 63 days is like when it actually becomes cemented as a habit.
So you really have to just stick with it long enough until that, like you're talking about, that paper folds
then you
into
hit
that automatic
point. Yeah, exactly, to where it becomes automatic. So yeah, I thought it was a great book, and one thing that I think is really cool about it too is, and this is mostly what we've talked about, is like the personal development, personal habits aspect of it, and I'd say that's about half of the book, but it is broken into 3 parts, and it's about the individual habits. Then it talks about organizational habits, like your workplace, and then it talks about societal habits. So I mean, it covers a lot of really good information, and they talk about, you know, different businesses and how they change the culture, and then different, you know, greater events in society, like even the Montgomery bus boycotts with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, and
which I thought was actually really fascinating.
yeah, I thought it was great.
I mean, the whole, like you're saying, the whole first maybe third of the book, when it talks about your individual habits, I think probably most people would be most curious about that.
Yeah,
how
I think
to change your
I think it also
habits,
fits really well within the context of the Lit Grit personal development type thing. I know I first read this book a couple of years ago. One of my good friends, I saw it on one of my good friends' sister's bookshelf. Cara D'Annabelle. I actually saw this on her bookshelf. So I'd seen it, and then one day I bought it. And first time I read it, I actually only read the first part. Once it got to the organizational stuff, it quite frankly bored me. And but I thought that was great. And then I reread it about probably 6 or 7 months ago. Read it all the way through, and then obviously reread it.
And I thought that part was fascinating. Actually.
I thought it was fascinating too. But it's
actually that's a good point to bring up, because sometimes people think that you have to read from page 1 to the last page of every book, and somehow you don't get to check it off your list unless you do that.
Right.
And the reality is, even if you're the kind of person who weirdly wants to start in the middle of a book, if that's your thing, whatever it takes. And some people,
especially with us beginning the Lit Grit Challenge, I think if you were to only read the first half of this book about the personal habits, individual habits, I think that's a great start, because part of establishing this habit, part of doing Lit Grit is establishing this habit of reading every day and reading for an hour every day. So I think it's really important. I think it's a great book to do early on in the process, because I think you'll read this book and then realize, okay, well, how can I make reading a habit for me? And that's something that I've had to do, and started to do before, kind of in preparation for this, was reading every morning. I know I touched on that last episode, but I try to read at least an hour every morning. And it's becoming easier. It's like anything else. It's muscle memory.
So then okay, it's 8 a.m.
Yeah, and so my cue is, I get back from walking my dog, and then I start reading for an hour. So that's been really good for me.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I think the whole, some of the larger concepts of habits and within society, and what creates a movement and things like that are further into the book.
Yeah.
When it talks about Rosa Parks and why Rosa Parks was, why that all happened with her, when there were actually people before Rosa Parks that had sat, not in the back of the bus, and then and even got arrested, but then did not create a movement.
Right.
So it talks about some of that, which I thought was super.
Yeah,
interesting.
I think it's and what's great about the book too is he just does it's a real page turner. I mean, some of this stuff, especially when you start to get into kind of the numbers, it might sound a little dry, but he's just, I think, a great author. I mean, he does it in such a way that it keeps your interest, and it keeps the way he tells the stories. He'll begin a story and then jump to the next story, and that at first it kind of bothered me, because it was like I wanted conclusion to that first story that he opened with. Mm-hmm. But what I found is it really kept me reading more, and then he would finish that story kind of at the end of that chapter. So I think he did a great job of engaging his readers and making you actually want to read everything. Have it make it be a page turner.
Yeah, I think the main thing too is he talks about planning. If you understand your habits, and then you plan for what's going to happen when those triggers or cues occur, then you're ready. You're ready. It's 3:00. You're ready. To do whatever it is you're trying to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. That's kind of a quick overview. It really is a terrific book. Mm-hmm. If you really want to change some really bad habits,
or create some,
I
felt like I was kind of a blank slate. Obviously, I'm not. Everybody's 60% of your day, but definitely great for creating new habits, getting rid of old habits, and it's just a fascinating book.
Yeah, absolutely. So let us know your thoughts on it. I'd be curious what some of the habits people are trying to break, and if once they read this book and hopefully apply some of this information. If they're able to do
and if nothing else, create a new habit of reading every day and join the Lit Grit Challenge.
Good one. That's a good one. Love it. Well, thanks for joining us, and good luck with your Lit Grit Challenge, and happy reading. episode, we'll be talking about Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. So if you're following along on the Lit Grit Challenge, that's the book we'll be covering.